Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you haven't already taken your seats, go ahead and take your seats. Remember, you're on camera. All right. Good morning, everyone. And welcome to the November School Employer Advisory Committee meeting here at CalPERS headquarters. To those joining us via webcast, easy for me to say, welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us as well. I'm Jamie Pope. I'm the manager of stakeholder outreach within the Office of Stakeholder Relations here at CalPERS, and I'll be your facilitator for today's session. This is the last of our SEAC meetings we're going to have this year here at CalPERS headquarters. Next year, for the calendar year of 2019, we're going to be just across the river at the CalSTRS building. If this is your first time joining us, we're certainly happy you're able to attend the meeting, where you'll be hearing the latest updates on services, programs, and policies related to your district's work with CalPERS. Just a few housekeeping notes, then we'll get started with the agenda. To those of you who are here in person, I know you hear me say this every time, everybody should have a gray folder. Please only have one gray folder. We put enough folders together for the number of registered attendees for the sessions. Remember, you can always download and print them back at the office later on. As I mentioned earlier, we are being joined via video conference by many of your colleagues across the state. So when we come to the Q&A portion after each topic's discussion, please be sure to wait for the microphone before asking your question. Otherwise, those joining via the webcast will not be able to hear the questions, and we wouldn't want to leave them out of anything. So I'm joined here both by Josh and Shauna, and they will be happy to bring those microphones directly to you when we get to that time. Now, for those of you on the webcast, again, good morning. I'm glad you could join us. If you have any questions during any of the presentations today, please email us using the SEAC mailbox. That mailbox is CalPERS_SEAC, S-E-A-C, at calpers.ca.gov. I'm going to say that just one more time. It's CalPERS_SEAC at calpers.ca.gov. All right, is everyone a little bit sleep deprived? Did anyone go into a candy stupor last night from Halloween? Yeah. I will admit there is a significant number of Snickers bars missing from my daughter's Halloween bag. And I make no apologies for that. All right, I'm told I don't have to make apologies, so that's a good thing. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with the agenda. Up first, we have our legislative update, and we're joined by Scott Blackledge today. Andrea, unfortunately, wasn't feeling well and couldn't join us this morning.
Okay, good morning, everyone. There we go. You got this covered up by this thing. I don't have any presentation, so can I be Jamie for a minute?
Sure.
Okay. Is there another slide?
There is. If you just hit the enter button. There you go.
So now I'm Andrea. Okay. Yeah. So, there was a lot of bills that ran through the legislature in these last 2 years, and there was a rush at the end, hundreds of bills being voted on in the last few days of session, and the governor taking action. It's his last year, Governor Brown, his last bill signing session, and he made he made his mark once again with his pithy veto messages and directions related to all sorts of issues. And so, what I'll focus on right now is just the bills that affect employers that did get chaptered. And then, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about any of the others. I think the first one, it doesn't necessarily directly apply to school employers, but only to the extent that they may participate in what's called a joint powers authority. I know that there's joint powers authorities for school districts related to insurance and things like that, but as you may recall, a couple of years ago, there was a CalPERS contracting agency in East San Gabriel Valley that was disbanded when LA County didn't renew a contract they had with this employer for training services, and as a result, the employer went out of business, stopped paying their CalPERS contributions, and in the end, our board had to reduce benefits by over 60% for these members. And there were concerns in the legislature about the possibility of this happening. Again, CalPERS has about 150 joint powers authorities that contract with us for retirement benefits. And so the chair of the Assembly PERS Committee, Assemblyman Freddie Rodriguez, introduced a bill this year, and it was sponsored by SEIU, in order to ensure that contracting, that these JPAs fulfill their promises to their employees. And so what it does is that it not only provides for CalPERS the ability to more easily collect funds necessary to pay member benefits, but it also makes the member agencies of the JPA liable for those retirement liabilities. It also eliminates the ability of the board to fund member benefits if there aren't enough contributions made by the employer for those members. In other words, it prohibits the board from using surpluses in the terminated agency pool to not reduce members' benefits as much as they otherwise would. But it doesn't establish a process, and it goes through a three-step process that allows these member agencies to apportion liability amongst themselves. If they can't reach agreement, it allows CalPERS to, and if any of the member agencies challenge it, it will go to arbitration. So to the extent any of your school districts participate in these joint powers authorities, it would be good for them to review this provision, Assembly Bill 1912. Another bill that was signed into law that you'd probably be interested in, I know that there's probably many questions about it, and I would ask you to defer those questions for later in the agenda. It relates to penalties for out-of-class appointments. As you may recall, last year, Governor Brown signed AB 1487 by Chairman Rodriguez, which, among other things, defined an out-of-class appointment for any CalPERS member employed by a school employer or a contracting agency as an appointment by the employer or governing body or governing board or body of an employer to a position that's vacant during recruitment for a permanent appointee. And that would be for a limited duration not to exceed 960 hours in a fiscal year. Once that bill was signed into law, the sponsor of that bill, which was, I believe, jointly the Professional Firefighters and the School Employees Association, they reviewed the bill and identified that the penalties didn't necessarily match up with their intent. They wanted the penalties associated with exceeding the 960-hour limit to be more substantial in order to defer these long-term limited duration appointments. And so what they did was they went to Assemblymember Rodriguez, who authored AB 2696, which increases the penalties established by AB 1487 for temporary appointments of these school and contracting agency members to the vacant positions. Specifically, it will now require an employer that violates these provisions to pay to CalPERS 3 times the difference between the employee and employer contributions on compensation that would have been paid and reported to the system for the vacant position, as provided by a publicly available pay schedule. And so it's that point, and then the other point is the contributions the employers reported for the member's temporary position for the entire period or periods the member serves in the out-of-class appointment. And so specifically, that means the old penalty was the difference between what the temporary appointee was making prior to the temporary appointment, or the contributions on that, and what they were getting paid and what the contributions being reported were for their temporary position. So now it's shifting from the pay and contributions for the temporary positions to what would have been paid if that position were filled by a permanent employee. So they think that that's a larger delta. And, to the extent that an employer is going to pay this temporary person closer to what the permanent person would make, that potential penalty would be much lower. So that's the theory behind it. As far as implementation is concerned and additional questions, I'm going to defer to Renee. Okay, a couple more bills related to the CalPERS terminating agency process. SB 1022 by Senator Pan, the chairman of the Senate PERS Committee, shortens the time frame in which a contracting agency can voluntarily terminate its participation in CalPERS. It also establishes a process for the employer to notify members and its former members and retirees that it wants to terminate participation in CalPERS. Now, the other part of this bill that will be of interest to you is that it also clarifies the confidentiality provisions of the Public Employees Retirement Law related to data provided by members, retired members, annuitants, and the beneficiaries of each. And it also applies those provisions to employers that participate in PIMCA for health benefits. It also clarifies that the confidential data of members, retired members, and annuitants, and the beneficiaries of each of those may be released to a current or former CalPERS employer, and that the data released to one of these authorized entities must be treated as confidential and may only be used for retirement purposes and related reporting and notice obligations. And then I think the last thing I wanted to point out to you, some of you may have been following SB 1413 by Senator Nielsen, which creates a California Employers Pension Pre-Funding Trust Program. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that that only applies to state and local contracting agencies. It does not allow school districts to participate in the pension pre-funding trust. At some point in the future, that may be the case. There may be authorizing legislation, but that is not the case right now. I think I'll just briefly touch on one more bill, and you may already have part of this related to STRS benefits for credentialed teachers. I know that their provisions are more liberal than PERS when it comes to employees that take leave of absence to perform union duties. This bill, SB 1085 by Senator Skinner, requires public employers to grant leaves of absence to employees serving as stewards or officers of an employee organization or of any affiliated statewide or national employee organization without the loss of compensation, benefit, seniority, rank, or classification. And it requires any reimbursement to the public employer by the employee organization, according to certain specified provisions. It also requires that the compensation must include the employer's retirement fund contributions and that the employee will earn full service credit during the leave and pay his or her employee retirement contributions. So with that, I'll open it up to questions on those bills or any other bills that you may have identified on the list. Is there anything?
Any questions? Oh, Vina, wait for the mic. Vina knows the drill.
Veena from Orange County. I just wanted to know about SB 1166.
Okay. SB 1166 by Senator Leyva. So that was sponsored by the California Professional Firefighters, and it relates to reportable compensation. And it applies only to the state and contracting agencies. It doesn't apply to the schools in
it doesn't apply
in the
to
forums.
us?
No.
Oh, good.
And so, as you probably recall, that CalPERS has provides this service to employers when they're negotiating MOUs to review the MOU and identify if all of the items of special compensation that are reported or that they've negotiated are actually pensionable and reportable to CalPERS. But we don't require that. And so there's instances where employers have negotiated items of special compensation in MOUs that don't comply with their statutes and regulations. And that is typically caught, let's say, in a CalPERS audit of the employer. And in those instances when things aren't pensionable, we have the ability to collect the overpayment to the members from the member and then return contributions that were made on that those pay items back to the employer for distribution to the employer and the member. That's resulted in sometimes, members have been receiving benefits for 4 or 5 years, and in an audit we find this, and we're only able to collect money that in overpayments back to the employee, I think 3 years, yeah. But there have been instances where fire personnel, retired fire personnel, have had substantial items. They've had to pay back thousands of dollars, and so the firefighters union didn't necessarily think that was fair, and they wanted to create a process to where the employer would make good to CalPERS on the overpayment, and we had negotiated with them so that they wanted to make sure that the member was made whole because the contract promised that they would get, pay and retirement benefits based on that item of pay. And so in the end, the final version of the bill was in a form where CalPERS would identify what that excluded amount would have represented over a lifetime of benefits, and then it made the employer responsible for paying that back to the member. That bill made its way. I don't think there were any no votes on it, but it made its way to the governor, and he wound up vetoing the bill. And in his veto message, he identified several things that there were, perhaps alternative ways to prevent these overpayments from occurring. And by all indication, the firefighters are coming back next year. I don't know if it'll be the same proposal or a revised proposal, but obviously there will be a new governor looking at that. So.
I just want to make sure, when you said it's not applicable to school members,
Correct.
and then if a school member is overpaid the retirement benefit and then it came into, audit or something,
Yes.
and they only go back 3 years to
That's the amount we can only collect. Overpayments made to members, in other words, benefit payments to
Yes.
members, going back 3 years. So if the overpayment, if they've been in retirement for longer than that,
Okay.
Then they don't have to pay that earlier amount.
Okay.
So, Renee?
But the employer is responsible for anything prior to that. So we bill.
Okay.
So if they were retired for 5 years.
The employer is responsible for anything beyond the 5 years. So, for example, someone's retired, or 3 years. So if someone's retired for 5 years, it's found through an audit, we would go back and collect. Our statute of limitations is limited to the 3 years unless there's other extenuating circumstances involved. But we would seek the 3-year repayment from the member, and then anything beyond the 3-year would be invoiced to the employer, and the expectation is the employer would pick up the tab for that. And so this bill that Scott was referring to would say that all 5 years would have been charged, but schools were not included in that bill, and it was vetoed, so it's still as is.
But currently you still collect from the employer?
Beyond 3 years, yes.
Beyond 3 years, you
Yes.
still collect?
Yes, today that was our status quo prior to this bill, and it continues to be.
Thank you. And I have one other one, which is about the AJR 41, about the Social Security. Now,
Yes. Yes.
Can you explain that one?
It's just a resolution. I mean, the government pension offsets are an offset against Social Security benefits, and so any changes to that happen according to federal law. And what this resolution, it's a non-binding resolution by the legislature, and they're asking the federal government to repeal the government pension offset and the windfall elimination provision that apply when public employees are receiving benefits that aren't coordinated with Social Security. I think this might be a good time to segue into what happened with the GPO and WEP at the federal level this year. I have Jeremy McCarroll from our office that handles and analyzes federal legislation here at CalPERS, and I think he can speak a little bit more to that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Good morning. Yeah, Scott mentioned there that was a non-binding resolution encouraging federal legislation. And since then, there has been 2 federal bills that have been introduced. And since we met last, that would attempt to change the windfall elimination provision. They are, for those of you keeping score at home, H.R. 6933 and S. 3526. At the moment, they're identical. A little background maybe for those of you who may be new about the windfall elimination provision. As Scott mentioned, it reduces Social Security benefits for retirees who have had two types of employers over the course of their career, one employer who withheld Social Security taxes and one who did not, but who did contribute to a pension. So I think that applies to everybody here because that mainly applies to teachers. So right now, workers impacted by the provision, that reduction to Social Security is a one-size-fits-all percentage. So regardless of how long you worked for one type of employer or the other, the reduction percentage is the same. And that one-size-fits-all approach is the problem that the authors of those bills want to change. So in broad terms, those bills, again, would change that reduction. It would apply to workers who will receive Social Security benefits starting on January 1, 2025. There's still going to be a reduction, but that reduction would be specific to the individual's work experience. So, for example, the more somebody paid into Social Security over the course of their career, the smaller their reduction would be. The other big thing the bill would do for members is introduce a monthly rebate that would start in 2020 for those that are currently seeing their Social Security benefits reduced because of WEP. A couple other things the bill would do: it would require the Social Security Administration to study partnering with state and local pension systems to improve general pension information sharing. And it would also allow the Social Security Administration to partner with states to get deferred comp plan information. And that's pretty much it. Again, for those of you keeping score at home, H.R. 6933, that was introduced by Kevin Brady, a Republican from Texas, and Richard Neal, a Democrat from Massachusetts. So there is some bipartisan support. And the formal title of the bill is Equal Treatment of Public Servants of 2018. Right now it's in the House Ways and Means Committee, so it's just now starting out. The Senate version was written by Senator Ted Cruz, also a Republican from Texas. It's got the same title. It's in the Senate Finance Committee, so it's also just starting out. At the moment, we're monitoring both. We don't expect any imminent actions on them. We are still reviewing it, so we don't have a formal position on it at this time, but if anyone has any questions.
Any questions from the group?
I have a question for Scott.
Okay.
Okay. There's a question right.
Oh.
Oh, okay. Well, then we'll save that question then.
Okay.
Any questions on this?
Okay. Thank you.
Wait.
Yeah, so we'll take care of the people in the audience here, and then we'll see if there's any questions on the phone. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah, just back to legislation questions. AB 2310, contracting agency cost sharing.
Yes.
Does that apply to schools?
No, it doesn't.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, that's good, because that would be a big old can of worms.
Yeah. Oh, Renee wants to speak.
We're getting
up.
Renee a microphone. Here we go.
Yes. So it, in the bigger general sense, it does not apply to schools. However, for those schools that have safety members that have an additional public agency contract for their police or fire or something like that, they are considered public agencies for that piece. So when you're talking about your general population of miscellaneous employees, the answer is no. But if it's your police and your police that you have a contract for,
Right.
that would I'm 90% positive it would apply to them because they are considered public agencies for that contract.
Yes, it would. It would apply to your safety members. And essentially, it's a technical change because right now what you have are these employers and employees negotiating that, let's say the employees will cover like a certain percentage of an increase in retirement liabilities that would otherwise be paid by the employer. And how that's usually, what we require is that the employers report or notify us of what percentage of compensation, the total contributions are broken out between employer and employee. And so what that actually requires is the employer to do a contract amendment every year to identify what percentage of compensation the employees are going to be paying. So what this bill does is essentially say, instead of doing a full contract amendment, we're creating a process where you can provide notice to CalPERS what the percentage of compensation for the employer or for the employee and the employer is going to be. And so it's going to shrink that time and the approval process. And so it's going to streamline things for employers who want to negotiate this in the future.
Right.
Yeah.
After you've done your first full one.
Yeah.
The modified process is for the sequential ones, but you have to do a full process for the first one, including elections.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, your hair's grown since I've seen you last.
Oh, thank you. I actually cut it recently.
Okay. We had a question in the back. Yes? Renee, can you?
Hand. I'm looking for a hand.
Yeah, my hair-free friend over here. Yes. Can you?
Michael, looking for a hand. I don't see a hand.
I was asking the same question.
Oh, okay. Good. Okay. With that, can we open it up to the phones?
We don't have a phone line. It's a webcast, so they submit their questions by email.
Okay. We're multi-channel. I love it. Okay.
right.
Nothing. Okay. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you next year. Okay.
Thank you very much, Scott and Jeremy. Poor Scott. No one ever mentions his hair.
Your hair looks beautiful too, Scott.
Okay, we have one last question.
So
coming in.
I'm going to ask a follow-up on 2310 and cost sharing. There's a few of us in schools, so LA County Office of Education is one of them, where we are on our own contract. So we're more like a public agency or we're miscellaneous. And there's a few of us out there. The cost sharing provision measures, it's my understanding that our agency could do cost, because we can modify our own contract, we could follow this process. Is that a correct statement? Yes. Okay. That was it. Thanks.
All right, thank you. We're going to, in the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda. And we're going to move on to payroll reporting and enrollment fees with the lovely Jennifer Rocco and Brad Hansen from the Employer Account Management Division.
Good morning, everyone. Is this on? I see the light. Okay. So we were asked to talk about payroll reporting and enrollment fees as they relate to AB 1309. I have Brad and Jonathan joining me today. Before I get too far into the presentation, how many of you were with us at Ed Forum last week? Just so I can see. All right. So for those of you that were, bear with me. I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of what was covered there, and then we can open up. I feel like there's probably more questions than there are education needed on the topic, which is why we're all here for you. So the objectives for AB 1309 first are basically just for better tracking. So it's always been a requirement since PEPRA that retirees are enrolled and reported to CalPERS. This is an area where we have a lot of compliance issues where we don't see retirees being enrolled and reported. So the purpose of the fee being assessed is to improve that. That way we can use our tracking mechanisms within CalPERS and our system to better identify when issues do come up with retirees. For example, if they are going over or getting close to the hours or receiving additional pay. So really the idea behind this legislation is to improve compliance and ensure that all of the retired annuitants are enrolled and reported in CalPERS. So this was effective January 1, 2018, and then we began assessing fees with the July 1, 2018 date. So there was kind of a a grace period in there where we were working to make system changes and enhancements in order to be able to charge these fees. So the two main pieces are for retired annuitant enrollment is that an employer must enroll a retired annuitant within 30 days of their effective date of hire. If that's not done, there's a $200 fee for each month following until that retiree is enrolled. The second piece relates to payroll reporting. So again, the pay rate and number of hours worked has to be reported within 30 days of the last day of the effective earned period. And again, there's a $200 fee assessed for each month that does not occur. So for the fee assessment, just to clarify, the enrollment fee and the payroll reporting fees are separate. So there's a $200 fee for each one. And we are assessing fees as of July 1st. And then the final piece is that an employer cannot pass on any of these fees to the retired annuitant. So they are the responsibility of the employer. One other thing I wanted to talk about just briefly is we do know that with these fees, there have been some issues as far as how they are appearing in my CalPERS. We also know that there are issues where, a district can see an enrollment fee, but the COE cannot, or vice versa. So we've been working with our IT team to try and go back and refine what was implemented in the system and make the necessary corrections. We're working on that right now. What we're also doing is making some wider changes in the system for our December release. Because we're doing that, we won't be assessing any fees in November. We're going to wait until the system change is put in place at the beginning of December, and then we'll assess the fees at that time, just in an effort to try and make sure that the fees are being assessed correctly. The COE can see the fees that they need to be able to pay, and if the districts do need to see the fees, that they can do so as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And then as far as the waivers go, if you have questions about that, Jonathan's here, but the financial office is reviewing those waivers currently. I think we had about 500 or so. So be patient. They're working on it, and you'll be hearing back from them soon. There are some resources up on the screen for you, the 2 circular letters that we published on the topic, and our email boxes if you do have questions. But like I said, we have our experts here, so the 3 of us can field any questions that you have on the topic. Who wants to?
Any questions? Vina has a question. I'm so surprised.
We could just have Vina sit up here.
We'll get you, Mike. Vina, I know there's other questions too. Yours was just the first hand that I saw.
Yeah.
Vina from Orange County. You just said that in November there won't be any fees. How about the one prior to November? Like, October
So
or September?
those are the ones that we're working to correct in the system now so that they reflect with the appropriate, if they were supposed to be viewable by the COE. But those will still be assessed and due in the system. It's just for November, we're taking a pause to make some more permanent changes in the system, and then we'll assess them in December.
Can we start with a clean slate? The reason I'm asking is that we submit our enrollments through a file process electronically, and at the county office, sometime we don't know till we submit our payroll that there is no enrollment, and sometime when we submit a file, either between PERS or our office, things error out or the file didn't go through, and then we tried to waive it. The tab wasn't working. Then between district and us, the county office, we thought maybe we should pay it and then waive it, Then we found out if you paid it, you cannot waive it. That's what we were told by somebody at the PERS. That's the way I understand. And other thing is that 30 days is a very tight timeline. Can it be changed? How can we change it to 60 days?
It's in the statute, right? It says 30 days. And so we're just adhering to what the law says. I mean, you'd have to do a legislative change in order to change that 30 days.
Because most of the time, like I said, the report is due within 30 days and it's hard to find out who wasn't enrolled. And by the time you submit, it's like instead of August 31st, it's November 1st, and your system generates that $200 this and all that stuff.
So, the law is what it is, but we are working on some system enhancements that should alleviate some of the stress for the schools especially. One is we're adding a new feature to add a zero payroll line, and that should be coming in the very near future, probably within the next 6 to 12 months. So you could just go in and say, like, you have a retired annuitant, you haven't got that information from the district, you could just add that zero payroll line in there and then later do a prior period adjustment or through your earned period report, add that time in. Additionally, in February, it might be January, but in February, there's going to be a way that the districts will have the ability to go into their payroll schedule and validate that there will be no payroll for those retired annuitants, even though there could be. So basically, you can go in there and into the future a few months and validate that they're not getting payroll for them, and then later, once you get that retired annuitant payroll, report it as an adjustment report. So they're kind of these little workarounds we put in there for the schools because we understand it is very difficult for you to get it in on time because you're relying on those time cards or from the information from the district or some of the other things that Vina had mentioned. Unfortunately, it's just not in there yet. Anytime we do system enhancements, it takes time for us to get them through our IT department, and we have a lot of conflicting priorities for other things that create a bigger impact to our employers. So look for those things. We'll be communicating those things out as they come up. But unfortunately, the 30-day rule is kind of hard and fast. That's what's in the Pearl. And I know like this first go-around, there's a lot of waivers, and I believe we're going to be waiving the vast majority of them. So we are kind of giving you guys that one-time reprieve. So
okay.
that's good news.
Yeah, I was going to say request a
So-
waiver for.
Yeah, we
Stuff
are
report,
trying.
yeah.
It's just we can't waive it because the tab doesn't work.
If the tab's not working, I would contact CSOD, the employer help desk, have them send a workflow that you're requesting a waiver. My team can work on that with you. As far as waivers, if you're waiting on a waiver and you have not heard from us, when we do the one-time waiver, we typically go over all of the fees that have been assessed, do an education, make sure that everything's of understanding, and we do waive the fee, all of them, up to that point, as our one-time fee waiver. Okay, so that we educate, make sure that everybody knows, make sure that we know that there aren't system issues, that you didn't get a tab. We do track all of that.
Okay.
And as far as paying a fee and then wanting it waived, I don't know of any rule that says I can't do that. I suggest that if you want it waived, don't pay it. I don't know if the tab disappears
Yeah.
or not, but
We
I
can
would
look
recommend
into
if you
that,
don't want to
yeah.
pay it, don't pay it.
And one thing to remember too about the waivers, they don't accrue any interest. I mean, we obviously want you to pay them timely and if you are indeed assessed one, but if there is something in dispute and you're wanting a waiver and you just haven't heard back yet, like he was saying, don't pay it if you're not, and there will be no interest assessed. It will be just that same $200 amount. The worst comes to worst, you'll be hassled by the collections team.
Yeah, and let the collection
He
team
knows
know.
me well.
Yeah. Who doesn't know you well?
And you can let the collection team know that you want a waiver, and they can
Right.
let me and my team know. We are working them. It has been a large population. I had to train staff on getting to it, so they are working it. If you do get a phone call and a voicemail about the fee waiver, they won't waive the fee until we've actually talked to you. So if you could call them back, or we'll call you again. But yeah, we are actually talking to each person who requests the waiver.
So we'll wait till we hear from Alfred.
Correct.
Thank you.
So there's some questions, I think, coming in on the email. Maybe we can.
Yeah, there are. Let's go
one
ahead.
more?
Let's,
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't see you.
So,
Debbie too.
Oh, there's a couple in here.
all right. So go ahead. You've got the microphone,
Yes.
and then we'll get to the gal behind you.
So I understand the waiver process and that it's going to take time. So we did get a phone call about it being waived, but we have an outstanding one still left from the original assessment. So do we wait to contact you to let you know about that one?
Yes.
Okay, and my other question is, how are the invoices, how is this process working? It's a little bit different than like our arrears invoices. All of the arrears invoices come through the county office, and then we distribute and collect on behalf of our districts. But these ones went out, some of them actually went out to the districts. So we had, 30 districts assessed, and then we also, as a county office, received the $81,000 penalty.
I'll jump in. That's the system issues that I was speaking about. So whoever can view the invoice also got the invoice. So that's something that we're working to correct. So it does go to the appropriate party so that the COEs do get that invoice.
Okay, so that's
we're
one of
working on it.
those. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, to piggyback on that.
Sure.
So those outstanding invoices now that are at the district level that the county office can't see, what happens with those? We can't pay them because we don't see them. I don't have a receivable ID. We can't make the payment. They don't have access to make them electronically because we typically do that on their behalf. So do we just kind of wait until the system is
Well,
updated?
that's what we're working to fix right now, is to go back in and make sure that they're going to the appropriate place. But it will change those that have already been issued. So if they did go to the district in error, they will be corrected to be.
I believe some of the districts are going to have paid them via via warrant. So,
Okay.
that's okay too, or not?
And like Jonathan said, they can still request. You can still request
Request
a
a waiver?
waiver in those. Yeah.
And a question about the waivers, and I might have misinterpreted this at Ed Forum. So, is it one time per district forever, or per fiscal year?
Forever.
Forever.
We'll waive one time. Like Jonathan said, his team is doing a lot of education to make sure we're all on the same page. We've all got the same understanding. So we'll make the waiver that one time, and then going forward. But unless there's maybe an extenuating circumstance, like Brad could probably speak to some of the things that occur with payroll. We're following a similar process, so maybe he can chime in there.
I think they kind of went crazy with the waiver, like when they first started getting them on their half, the districts. So I hope, I don't know if they knew that initially.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, we've got one more in the back. Hi.
Hi, Jennifer. Debbie from Fresno County Office of Ed. You had mentioned that there won't be any fees assessed in November until the release goes through in December.
Mm-hmm.
Will fees be going retroactively back to anything that might have occurred in November?
So, in December, it will be for, you'll get, let's just say, worst case, you have a retiree, you haven't enrolled, you'd be getting 2 months of fees in December.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure that it wasn't like a free pass and everybody thinks,
No,
okay,
it's not a free pass.
I'm
We're
good.
just holding off.
Okay, because we've been trying to put the fear into everybody to be diligent with submitting these things, and to have that happen would just throw everybody off. So I just wanted to clarify.
Happen. It's just going to happen a little late.
Awesome, thank you.
Oh, we got a couple
I have a
more.
question. Since
Sure.
this is a one-time waiver, since we did not know about that initially, can it be, clean slate, and now from here forward, it's a one-time thing? Because districts may reevaluate whether they want to waiver this invoice, or maybe, just pay it and go forward for something in the future. Because if it's a small invoice, maybe they don't want a waiver and they want to wait, and if they get a larger one.
Looking
And
at
we were not
Jonathan.
aware of this one-time, one-and-done thing.
When submitting a waiver, please give as much justification to it as possible and allow my staff to look at it. If they have questions, be able to bring it up to the management, and we will review and go over that. If there's any extenuating circumstances, my team reaches out to Jennifer's team, to Brad's team, to make sure that we know about what's going on, and we're not steadfast in no waivers. It's, I just have to have justification, because I can't say yes, no, yes, no. I have to be very, very consistent.
And was this one per district or one for county office as a whole with all the districts under it?
We typically look at the waiver as who's requesting it, the reason behind it. We look at each one of them individually.
Okay.
So every waiver is judged on its own merit. I'm not going to say whether it's district or it's going to be judged on its own merit. Is it the case of we've already done this? Then no. If we haven't done it and there's more education, then we'll continue to do it in that manner.
Okay. And then do these invoices fall under the mandatory EFT payment, or is that, if that is law only for employee and employer contributions and the health contributions?
Our preferred method is EFT, but the law is for contributions and health payments.
Thank you.
Sean from LA County, I have a special request, and that's when you fix all the invoice issues, if you could take the July invoice, August, September, October, and combine them into one invoice so that we can apply for the waiver the one time and get all 4 months waived. I'm joking.
I'm thinking.
I'm half joking. Half joking.
If we haven't gotten to your if we haven't gotten to your waiver and we have not talked to you, we go with all of the ones up to that point. So we're trying to be very consistent with every employer, whether it's a school district, a public agency, the state of California. We're providing as much education and as much opportunity, but I'm not going to say that because I got a hold of you now in July and that I'm educating, or I got a hold of you in November and it's July that I'm working, that I'm not going to try and work July, August, September, October together.
Right.
That's what my team is trained to do. So instead of making 4 phone calls to you, we make 1, and we try and take care of it at that time. Because we took some time to educate, our queue got backed up, and we're making those calls now.
Excellent. Just so I'm clear, the invoices that were issued, and I know you guys are working to get those to the right person. Are you guys going to issue new invoices, like new corrected invoices, or are you just trying to take the existing invoices and get them to the right person? You know what I mean?
I'm not quite sure, but Cynthia, do you know if they're going to issue? Oh. So the answer is that we're not going to issue new invoices. We're just going to be moving it to the appropriate COE. If the district got the invoice, we'll move it to the COE. But no new invoices. We're just moving them to the right spot.
Going forward, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Going
you.
forward, you'll get a nice new invoice to you.
Thank you.
Those old ones are collector's editions.
A collector's invoice. I'm sure those will be popular items on eBay. All right, so I'm going to jump in here. We have quite a few questions coming in to the SEAC email box. I encourage those that are emailing and continue to do that. We want to make sure we get the information to you. I'm not going to have time to go through all of them here, but one, we've kind of talked about it a little bit. And so the question comes from Kings County Office of Education, and it says, if after we confirm no payroll for retirees on the appointment reconciliation, does the system go back and reverse invoices sent in error? Don't all jump at once.
The invoice will not auto-correct. You'd have to ask for a waiver and say that you marked the appointment for no payroll reported, and then we would go back and look at the dating of it and determine if the invoice is valid or invalid.
All right, great, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question here in the room, and then we're going to go ahead and move to the next topic. Any questions?
Yeah, for those who are emailing in, we'll go back and look through the questions. If there's something we didn't cover, we'll definitely get back to you.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, continue to email those questions, and we will be sure to get those questions in touch with the subject matter experts so we can get you the answers that you need. All right. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next piece
that's Brad.
On our agenda. And we have more from the lovely Brad Hansen. This is Outofclass Appointments, otherwise known as Government Code 20480.
Yes. So how's everyone doing today?
Fabulous.
Excellent. And I know many of you witnessed this presentation at the Ed Forum, and a few people actually suggested to have it here at the School Advisory Committee as basically like a training opportunity because you guys record these things. So I wore my most slimming suit because I know that the camera adds a few pounds. And I even wore my old school name badge from when I first started here 20 years ago. So this is a special presentation for me.
And now it feels special to us.
Yes, and you guys are always special to me. You guys are more friends to me than anything else. So go easy on me. Remember that, okay? But actually, this presentation is good news to everybody. And at the forum, I actually predicted it. I said, through this presentation, there's going to be this aha moment. And you guys are going to think, oh, this isn't as big of a deal as we thought. It's a big deal, and you need to do it. But it's not going to impact as many members as you first thought. And there has been a lot of kind of miscommunication about this or things that really weren't well vetted out. And we are going to get out a new circular letter at the beginning of next year because there was a slight amendment to this, but really all it did was clarify the penalty, which is how we were going to assess it anyhow. Okay, so let's get into the presentation itself. It's kind of weird on there.
Is it looking? Oh, yeah, it is, isn't it?
I need an adult. Fix this for me.
Looks like I'm the only one around. You're in trouble if I'm the adult you're relying on here. Let's see. Can we just use the clicker?
Oh, it's just kind of off kilter a little.
All right.
I guess we could get by with it, but if it... There you go.
Is that better? That's not better.
Or if you scroll up to the top and then do page down.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Any other adults? Any other? Okay, here, let's. Oh, it's just because it's in a
well,
different
that's
format.
okay. I'll make it work. I'll make it work.
Okay.
I'll make it work.
Just use the page.
Brad thought it was a special presentation for him, turns out.
I'm used to a full screen slide. That's just me. Like I said, I'm old school CalPERS. I'm used to full screens.
You didn't say what kind of special.
Yeah. I love this. This is great. Okay, so AB 1487, 20480. The main question I get asked is, why are you guys doing this? And what's the objective? Well, in reality, yes, it is in the Public Employees Retirement Law. And yes, we must comply with it and enforce it, the fact that this needs to be done. But this really wasn't a CalPERS-sponsored bill. It was sponsored by the labor units, labor groups. And the main purpose of this was that with pension reform, with PEPRA, the temporary upgrade pay special compensation was eliminated. So for PEPRA people, if they were put into these out-of-class appointments, these upgraded positions, they weren't getting the CalPERS compensation that a classic member would get. So the intention is to limit the amount of time someone could be in an out-of-class appointment and not get CalPERS contribution or compensation for that particular out-of-class appointment. So that's the main goal behind this, is to limit the amount of time you could put someone in that position and not compensate them for it. Sure, they're receiving the pay, but they're not getting the CalPERS benefits. So that's the true purpose behind all of this, is to track those hours, report them to CalPERS, and then if you exceed those hours, be assessed a penalty. Yeah, it's just weird. Okay. All right. Let me make sure I'm on the right slide. It looks wrong. Okay, that's right. All right, so what is an out-of-class appointment? Let's define that first. An out-of-class appointment is a person in an upgraded position or higher classification. It has to be for a limited duration, and it must be what we consider a vacant position. Now, vacant position has a different meaning with this law than what we're all used to. When I think of vacant position, that means the person's just not there. They're separated, they retired, it's vacant. But for this purpose, it has to be a position you're recruiting for. So let's say that I retire tomorrow, and then Renee puts Fran Warden, manager too that works with me, in my position on a temporary basis. But they don't recruit for the position. Well, guess what? That's not considered a vacant position. And thus, you don't even need to track the hours or send it in to us because it doesn't meet the definition of a vacant position. However, if Renee puts Fran into that position and she does initiate the recruitment, guess what? Now it is considered vacant and you must track those hours. Now, the main question I got asked about this is, well, what's a recruitment? And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. A recruitment isn't a piece of paper that's been approved and you're out there and it's on your website or it's on the window in your HR office saying recruitment, please apply. It's the fact you initiated the recruitment. So if you send an email to your HR office saying, we're looking to recruit for Brad's position, we would consider that a recruitment, even if you haven't done all the paperwork for that yet. Now, again, this is a self-assessment, though. When you send your stuff into us, we're relying on you to provide us valid information. So it's on you to determine if you're recruiting for it or not. However, eventually we will be auditing for these type of things. And if you're not truly reporting this to us, you will be assessed a observation on your audit report, what we called findings in the past. So that's the definition of an out-of-class appointment. Someone that's in a vacant position that's being recruited for, and they're receiving pay based on that upgraded position. And then lastly, they can only work in that position for 960 hours. So now we know what an out-of-class appointment is. Let's talk about the reporting for this. Okay, so in May of every year, we're going to send you a reminder notice. It'll be kind of like Christmas Eve, the day before Christmas. We're going to be like, okay, it's that time again. It's AB 1487 time. Be prepared to send us the hours for people that had worked in these out-of-class appointments. So that way you'll be put on notice. And then come June, or at the end of June, we'll send you another letter saying, hey, the end of the fiscal year's up. You have 30 days now to report your hours to us. And then lastly, we'll send a third notice if you hadn't sent those hours to us, just another gentle reminder to please send us those hours. And we want the hours regardless if the person has worked 960 or not. Even if the person was just in the upgraded position for 2 weeks, we still need you to send those hours in. There will be no penalty, there's no violation, but the law says that you have to report those hours to us. So that's what's required for you to report. Oh, good, do this too. So here's the part that I hope you have the aha moment. So the penalty. The penalty, if you exceed the 960 hours, is 3 times the difference in contributions that would have been paid had the person been put into that upgraded position for contributions that are otherwise in the system. So and it's based off of the position on the publicly available pay schedule. So let's go back to my scenario. I leave, and then Fran is put into my position on a temporary basis. And she's in that position for 1,000 hours. She exceeds the 960. Well, and they were recruiting for position. Well, technically, yes, they should be tracking those hours. And she exceeded those 1,000 hours, so you send those in. But there may be no penalty. Fran's a classic member. She was getting temporary upgrade pay. Those contributions are in the system with CalPERS. We'll go to look, we'll say, okay, Fran worked in that position for 1,000 hours, she exceeded the hours. But those contributions for that upgraded position are in the system, there's nothing to penalize because we have those contributions. That's the big difference. If it's a PEPRA member, they might not be eligible for that temporary upgrade pay. In fact, I know that they're not. They might be getting paid it, but you can't report the temporary upgrade pay to us. So had Fran been a PEPRA member and she was getting temporary upgrade pay but wasn't reported to us, then she'd be in violation, and CalPERS would then have to pay the difference in those contributions. And the contributions go all the way back for every hour that that person was in an upgraded position. So for all 1,000 hours, it'd be the difference in the pay that she's receiving in her current position and the upgraded position. And that's what would be reported to PERS. And it's based off of the contributions, not the pay rate. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes? I want to see at least one nonverbal indicator. Okay. Okay, excellent. So this year was our first go-around. We actually were attempting to get this automated through our system. However, it was such a quick turnaround time, we weren't able to do it. But by next year's reporting cycle, we're going to have this all automated. There'll be a new panel in my CalPERS, and instead of having to send us paper sheets with the hours for each person, we're going to allow you to go into the system and just key them in. And for the larger employers, like a lot of the schools are, we're looking at adding the capability for you to upload a file. Give us an Excel spreadsheet, perhaps, that has every person that was in a upgraded position and met the definition of a vacant position with those hours. You just put it on the spreadsheet, send it in to us, and then we'll be able to do our assessment. It should be a lot smoother go-around this time than last time. So look for that in our circular letter, too. We should be defining that out. If we don't have it ready by the time the circular goes out, we'll send another one out to tell you about the enhancement on that. And I'll probably be talking about it at the School Advisory Committee meeting in, when is the next one? February. So, in fact, put me down for that.
You're already on the agenda, Brad. Don't worry.
Nice. All right. And if you need any more information, something that's a printout on what we just talked about today, we do have the current circular letter that's out there on our website. All right, so hopefully that helped clear the air a little bit on out-of-class appointments. Now, is there any questions?
Okay. We've got some folks coming around with the mics.
Brad, thanks. Sean from LA County, thanks for going over this topic where it's recorded, and I can send the link to all my coworkers and higher ups. I want to give, just so it's completely clear, I want to give you a scenario.
Sure.
And so at our office, typically what we do when we have a vacant position is we move an employee into that position and onto that pay scale for that position. So they take 100% of the duties, they move into the position, they get the higher pay rate.
Okay.
And then that is subsequently what is reported. When it comes to tracking those hours, again, if you hit that 1,000 hours and you're at that pay rate that would otherwise be filled with somebody who is in that position, regardless of whether you're Classic or PEPRA, can you talk about what the assessment would be for that?
So so if you were recruiting for it, then yes, you still send those hours into us, but there would be no penalty because the contributions are otherwise in the system. It doesn't always have to just be temporary upgrade pay. You know, if you put someone into that position and you have a personnel action form that shows that they were actually put into that position and you're reporting that pay rate of that new position that you've been temporarily upgrading them to, we're getting those contributions. So there is no difference. The word in the law says contributions otherwise in the system. So if they're in there, there's no penalty to be assessed, but you still need to send us those hours.
Awesome, thank you. I have one other question. You mentioned right at the beginning when you got up there. Now the way that is now being assessed is under the new Assembly Bill 2696 that amended the government code. You said very quickly, this is how we were going to assess anyway.
Correct.
And so this law that passed September 26th for this year was the first time in July when we had to report. so this law is kind of retroactive to that first reporting. I'm just trying to ask for clarification on your statement that said this is how we were going to assess anyway.
Essentially, the statute just what the amendment did is it just clarified that publicly available pay schedule part. Our circular letter was a little misleading. We made it believe it was based off of the pay rate, but it was really based on the contributions that should have been otherwise in the system. So this clarified that more, and then it also just made it more clear that we were going to look at that pay schedule. So if I'm a manager 3 and the person I upgraded was a manager 2, and then we didn't get those contributions, we'd look and say, okay, the pay rate at manager 3 is $5,000, and the pay rate for manager 2 is $4,000. So we're going to assess the contributions based off of that $1,000 difference. So 6%, let's say, of the $1,000 per month, per hour that the person had not worked in that position. That's how the penalty would be assessed. That's how our intent was all along, but our circular letter wasn't super clear on that, and I think that the person that championed this bill wanted to make sure that we got it right because they thought we had a bad interpretation. In reality, it was just poor communication in our circular letter, and that's why we're going to get a new one out in February.
Again, just so I'm 100% clear. So the scenario that I gave you on how we do it, where you said that assessment is 0. So when we have employees, and we do have some employees that did work over the 960 hours, based on that same scenario I gave you, those for July will not be assessed.
Yes, correct. As long as those contributions are in our system for the upgraded position, then there will be no penalty. Still send us the hours. You know, with the caveat, we'll look into everything too. If you send those hours, we're going to look into it, make sure that you're not reporting temporary upgrade pay for a pepper person. You shouldn't be able to, because I think our system would deny it anyhow. But yes, at face value, what you said, if everything's 100% on that, there would be no penalty because we have those contributions. It's to avoid having members be in these upgraded positions and not getting their retirement contributions for that. It really is more for in my opinion, the benefit of the PEPRA members that aren't eligible for that temporary upgrade pay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I think Vina had a question too. Oh, there's another one over here. Oh, hello. Sorry about that.
Anna, Riverside County. When you have this electronically submitted, so this is going to be at the district level, not the county level?
We're still working the details on that, and I believe we do want to open it up to all, to district and county office. Some will want probably just county office, and others will probably want districts, but I want to make it so it's flexible for all, so we don't run into the same kind of situation we did with the invoices.
Okay. And so my question on the ones that were collected for July or June or July, as a county office, I did not receive any letters, so I guess was there full compliance from all the districts, or was that tracked? Or
Yeah, so for this particular bill, right? Yeah, so we got pretty much every employer reported to us. There was a handful that we're still looking more in depth into. But as of right now, we've assessed no penalties or no fees. It was just for a 6-month period, so there wasn't that many people that exceed the 960. But we're just looking into now to see were those contributions in the system? Was the person getting temporary upgrade pay? Those type of situations. Because it was this whole huge manual process and it wasn't automated, it's just taking us a lot of time to do that deep dive on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, it's coming to you, Vina.
Since you missed me last time, I have to make sure I make up for last time.
I don't remember you at the presentation last time. I was so surprised. I was a little bit hurt.
I want to know, how do you define 100% of duties? Because we have certain districts where when they are transferring a employee to a upgraded position, out of class position, the person might do 2 days of upgraded job and 3 days of their regular duty. And some of the districts, they rotate different employees.
So to me, that doesn't sound like they're in an upgraded position. Because for us, that means that you've been fully 100% upgraded position. You're not doing any of the other duties of your old job.
In a month, in a week, like 100% of the duties?
It has to be 100% for the time that you're reporting.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anybody?
Is there a lot of email questions?
I'm not seeing any email questions on the topic. So, and if you guys, I see one question in the back. We'll get you a microphone here. Just hold on one second.
Hi, Teresa Cooney, Los Rios Community College District. So I was at the last conference. So there was some confusion in regard to out of class, and I didn't quite catch it, but you were talking about if they're doing partial, that we have to still report hours, but not necessarily have them paid hours when they're.
Could you define the partial?
The pepper, like if someone's a pepper and they're maybe doing 20% or 50% of the upper, higher paying position, it's not 100%, so it's not out of class. But then you kind of touched on.
Well, I think because at the Ed Forum, it kind of strayed away from 1487, and it kind of went more towards temporary upgrade pay. So I believe that question had to do with temporary upgrade pay. So for temporary upgrade pay, it's only available for classic members. Pepper members, they're not eligible for that. And the main rule, and Vina kind of touched on it too, is they have to be performing 100% of the duties. So if you're parsing it out, so someone's doing 20% here, 20% there, that is not temporary upgrade pay, and it's not reportable. And I wouldn't consider that an out-of-class appointment either. Those are just essentially like extra duties, which could be considered overtime. Does that help?
Okay, thank you.
Excellent.
Right.
Yes.
So Brad, if I can jump in here, we've got one question here from Ventura County Office of Ed, and this is kind of on the same topic. It says, how does this work for PEPRA new members since temporary upgrade pay is not reportable to PERS for PEPRA new members? If a PEPRA employee works over the 960 hours in these out-of-class appointments, are we then supposed to report contributions for them for the temporary upgrade pay?
No, that's part of what this bill is trying to eliminate. So temporary upgrade pay, again, has been eliminated for PEPRA. And if you're paying them temporary upgrade pay, that's fine. You can give them the pay, but you just can't report their contributions. So with PEPRA members, if they exceed that 960, even if it's just 1 hour over, there will be that penalty assessed, and you do not have the opportunity to report those contributions to CalPERS because it's not supported by statute or regulation.
Thank you, Brad. Any other questions?
Vina, I think.
Vina's got one more. Okay, let's get you a mic, Vina. Hold on.
I just want to clarify that a PEPRA employee, they can still work over 960 hours, including temporary upgrade, but not pay contribution after 960?
Yeah, I mean, you can still work them over the 960. No one's stopping you from doing that. No one's stopping you from paying it. It's just that you'll be assessed a CalPERS penalty for not contributing on those appointments, which you can't.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
You can still pay them, keep them in there as long as you want. It won't really impact their retirement at all, right? I mean, if you don't get the contributions, obviously you're not going to get the retirement for that. But we're not going to. It does nothing to do with denials of special comp or how you guys pay anybody.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the group? Any other questions for Brad? Well, I know quite a bit of you folks were raised your hand earlier when we asked how many folks attended the educational forum. That was that last week?
Yes.
That was last week. Wow, time flies when you're having fun around here. I was there myself. I saw a few of you roaming around. And if you notice, the slide deck that Brad used today was directly taken. It's got the Ed Forum logo that we used this past year. If you haven't had a chance to attend the educational forum, really informational sessions just like this are the type of things that you can expect. So if you haven't had a chance to attend, try to take a look at the possibility for attending this next year in 2019. And we're still ironing out the details for that, but just a little plug for next year's Ed Forum if you aren't already planning on attending. All right, with that said, I think if there's no other questions for Brad, all right. Well, thank you for your ever so special presentation.
Thank
you. And that brings us to probably many people's favorite item on the agenda, which is break time. So it is about 10 minutes to 11. Let's go ahead and take a break until 11:05. and we will resume at 11:05. Thank you very much.
Hello. We are back on the webcast. Let's go ahead and sit back down. We're going to bring our next presenter up. Thank you. All right. I was told I wasn't loud enough on the table mic, so here I am with the handheld. But I'm going to go ahead and hand this back to Shauna. Just might as well do our next introduction. So the next item on the agenda is covering the service prior to membership service credit purchase. And for that, we have Sharon Hobbs. So go ahead and come on up.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. Can everybody hear okay? Yes. Wonderful. And I think the earlier slides that were sent out have Tana Camargo on there. She wishes she could be with us today, but she's under the weather, so you've got me instead. And I recognize some faces in the room from Ed Forum. Sure. Sorry. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Still not loud enough?
We'll work with our audiovisual team to get the volume turned up on the microphones.
Okay, great. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Good morning. I am Sharon Hobbs. I'm the Assistant Chief of the Service Credit Purchase and Elections Section. Our team was requested to be here with you today by folks from Ventura County. We made some changes to our service prior to membership employer certification process. It was well received. We printed an article in our 2018 summer edition of the Employer News, and I understand those districts really appreciated the new process, and so I'm excited to be here and happy to report some news for you folks today. We've looking at the service prior to membership process, also known as SPM, that represents time worked for a CalPERS covered employer prior to CalPERS membership. So once that employee attains membership, they can request to purchase that prior time. And we have received a lot of feedback on how we can improve that process. We want you to know that we heard you, we listened, and we made some significant changes. There was also a recent circular letter. It was issued October 18th, and that is circular letter number 200-060-18. And it's titled Enhancements to the Service Prior to Membership Service Credit Request Form. This, what I'm going over today, is also outlined in that circular letter. So we've revised our SPM request form to make it a fillable PDF online. The employee can now complete the first page, sections 1 through 3, and email that form to you for completion if you accept it via email, or they can print it and take it to your location. And we look for you to complete sections 4 and 5 of the form. And once that's completed, if you could submit that to CalPERS and then provide that employee with a copy of the document. We also suggest that you keep a copy for your records as well. And the employer certifies the payroll by pay period with the beginning and end dates. And also the position title, the full-time pay rate equivalent, the time worked in hours, and the gross earnings. We've also added a column for the months worked per year to the form now, in addition to wanting to know the time base. If your agency no longer has payroll records for you to complete the employer certification, please feel free to use, if you're willing to, use W-2s or Social Security statements in addition to any personnel documents that you have. Some employees are great record keepers and they have their pay stubs from day one on the job. And so if you're comfortable with using that information to complete the certification, we will accept that as long as you're completing the certification on the SPM form for CalPERS' use. We don't need that supporting documentation, but we do recommend that you keep it for your records. You can also now group employer certified payroll for SPM periods that span multiple fiscal years. And that seemed to be very well received, so I hope that resonates with some of you. So the group months must be in the same fiscal year with the same pay rate and the same position title. Pay rates, position hours, and earnings must be listed separately if the member worked in multiple positions. A new line must begin if the member had a break in service consisting of an entire pay period. And in addition, if the member changed pay rates during the fiscal year, a new line must begin with the new pay rate. The fiscal year must be broken down by pay period if the member worked more than 1,000 hours in the fiscal year. And then what we're also looking for is for you to provide overtime payroll information on a separate line. Overtime hours are not used in the calculation of SPM, but we do review that information, and those hours are considered if they could lead to a membership enrollment issue. And then also for special compensation, we ask that you provide that on a separate line, and that should be listed by pay period using also the pay period beginning and end dates. Oh, just a kind of note there, not to use the check issue date. So when I say pay period beginning and end dates, oftentimes what we find is we'll get the check issue date, but the check issue date can sometimes be issued almost in the next fiscal year, especially if there's a biweekly schedule. So just a little note for that. So some reminders is that we look for an authorized representative from your agency to certify the SPM form. And what we really are looking for is for the CalPERS contacts to be current and updated with the authorized representative from your agency. So we do validate that information. If the employer certification is not consistent with our requirements, then the employee's SPM request will be considered incomplete, or they may not be deemed eligible to purchase the time. And then we recommend that you encourage the employees to purchase the service credit earlier in their career. We're doing an outreach effort on our behalf, but as you guys are our partners, we're looking for you to do the same because you don't all have the same retention cycle. So, if those payroll records no longer exist, it just makes it harder for that person to be able to provide you with the documentation needed to do the certification. So if they buy it earlier in their career, for one, it's probably cheaper for them. Usually it is. But for two, usually you will have the payroll records and be able to certify the time for them. Does anybody have any questions on the SPM certification process changes? Is anybody familiar with it, and are you liking it so far? I'm seeing some heads nod. That's great. We are open to feedback, so please, if you see things along the way and you want to reach out to us, we're more than happy to take that feedback. Because these changes happened as a result of feedback we received from you, so thank you. You were heard.
All right. Any questions for Sharon? All right. I'm not seeing any. All right. Thank you. All right. Here, I'll take this. Figure out how to turn this thing off. Let's see. There we go. And we're going to go ahead with the next item on the agenda. And that is a special presentation on health benefit regions. And that is by our wonderful, actually recently retired actuary. Aren't you all jealous? I know I am. Mr. Gary McCollum. So thank you, Gary. Oh, and a side note, your slides for this presentation, if you want to follow along in your packet, for those of you with us, these were printed separately. So it is the one that looks like this, cleverly titled Health Regions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I thought long and hard about that title.
Very good.
Are they on the screen? Right click.
So you have a clicker.
Oh,
you just hit
oh,
enter
this here.
or use the
Okay.
clicker.
Left, right should work. Left, right. Left. Nope, that went the wrong way.
Go one more.
Aha.
There we are.
Okay. Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone, or almost good afternoon. As she said, my name's Gary McCollum. I am a health actuary. I recently retired in July, and looking back, I have no reason why I agreed to come back for this project, but I'm here, so I will give you the best I've got. We're going to talk briefly about healthcare costs in California and the regions, and about the fact that we are currently in a project to reevaluate the regions. So, first question, what is a region? Now, your health premiums that you all pay, contracting agencies, schools, they're all based on the region in which you're located. And there are currently 5 regions. And you might ask, what is a region? Well, it's a group. Currently, it's a group of counties that have been grouped together because they have similar health care costs. And I should say they had similar health care costs when they were grouped together, and that was back in 2005. So I think you can see why we're looking at it now. It's been 13 years. It's about time to look at it. The counties were originally grouped into 4 regions: the Los Angeles region, the other Southern California region, the Bay Area / Sacramento region, and then the other Northern California region. In 2008, because of a special pilot project with Blue Shield, they separated the Sacramento region into its own, away from the Bay Area, which created a 5th region. And then in 2014, I think it was, they moved Yolo County from the Bay Area region into the Sacramento region. So that's a brief history of what the regions are. I want to emphasize one thing. A lot of people either confuse or compare healthcare costs in a region to the cost of living in that region. And they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. So what it costs you to buy a house, to rent a house in a region is not the same thing as what it costs you to pay for healthcare in a region. So you have to keep that in mind. So we will look at a specific example real quickly in the life of a school administrative employee. So this example takes the business manager of a school district in Ventura County. That's the lower one on this little slide. And we took as the example a PERS Choice PPO plan. Family premium in 2018 is $1,613. That's the total premium. The member's contribution would depend on the school district's contribution. So this individual changes jobs and moves up the coast to San Luis Obispo County. Now, Ventura County is part of what's called the Los Angeles region. And San Luis Obispo County is part of what's called the other Southern California region. And when he moves, he or she, I should say, the premium in San Luis Obispo in the other Southern region jumps up to $1,817.30. That's a $200 increase to the individual on a family basis just because they moved from one region to the other, excuse me. Now, those regions are about 120 miles apart, but like I said, those 2 counties are about 120 miles apart, but like I said, they're in 2 different regions, so they get charged 2 different premiums. And the question is, should they be different? And that's part of what we're looking at in this reassessment of the regions. So real quickly on the calculation of health rates, we calculate a single rate for all members within the CalPERS health system. That's both state employees and all the public agency employees. And we get one rate for the state of California. Now, the state employees pay that rate. They're a captive group. They don't have a choice of where they get their health insurance from. They get it from CalPERS. And so they pay that one rate regardless of where they live within the state. We don't have to market. We don't have to try and retain the state of California. CalPERS does have to market and try to retain public agencies and school districts because you have a choice to buy your health insurance with CalPERS or with someone else. Now, back in 2003 and 2004, CalPERS was losing agencies in the southern part of the state because the healthcare costs in Southern California are cheaper than they are in Northern California. And we had just one rate for the public agencies back then also. Well, that one rate averaged over North and South was higher than what they could find by going to a broker within Southern California alone. Oftentimes 15 to 20% cheaper. So in order to solve the exodus problem, they created the regions for public agencies. So, like I said, during the rate development project, we calculate a state rate. Then we take that rate and multiply it by what's called a regional factor to get the rate for each of the regions. So, what's a regional factor? Well, that's a representation of the average cost of healthcare in that region compared to the average cost of healthcare within the whole state. So we take that state rate and multiply it by the regions. I gave you a very simple example here. If we had a $100 state rate, and you probably wish it was $100, but let's just take 2 members is all we have in the public agency arena. We have one that lives in Northern California, one that lives in Southern California. And the cost of health care in the Northern California region is $120. The regional factor would be the 120 divided by 100, or 1.2. In other words, that region is 20% more expensive than the statewide average, and that would be the rate charged to that region. Down in Southern California, whatever the region is, it's only $80. So the factor for that region would be 80 divided by 100, or 0.8. Now, when you look at the premiums charged, you would get $120 from the one region and $80 from the other region, which adds up to $200, which is the same amount we'd collect if we had charged the state rate to both regions. But as you can see, if you're in Region B and you have the choice of paying $100 if we charge just a state rate to everybody, or $80 if you went outside CalPERS, there'd be several of you that would choose to go outside. So let's look real quick, because people will say, why is healthcare costs more expensive in the north? So now remember, this is healthcare costs. This is not cost of living. So you could live in Modesto, for example, work in the Bay Area. Now you choose to live in Modesto because it's cheaper to buy a home there, and you're willing to drive the distance into the Bay Area to work. But the healthcare costs are not necessarily cheaper in Modesto. So you might end up paying the same or even more health premium in Modesto than you do in the Bay Area. But why are premiums more expensive in the north than in the south? Well, there was a 2017 report by the Center for Health Policy at Brookings that looked into this question, and they had a few conclusions. Number one, Northern California is dominated by a few large healthcare systems. If you're up here in Northern California, you'll recognize Kaiser and Sutter and Dignity. Southern California has much more smaller independent systems, and they have much more hospitals, so there's more competition. Northern California also has less leverage negotiating premiums to health insurance companies when negotiating with the hospitals and the provider groups, precisely because they are larger, more centralized systems up north than down south. And also labor costs tend to be higher in the healthcare field in the north than they are in the south. And then finally, there's one other reason why that differs, and that is fee-for-service payments versus capitation payments. So I'm sure you're all familiar with those two terms, right? I don't need to go into them. Well, I will. Okay. So fee-for-service is exactly what it says. You go to a doctor or you go to a hospital, some service is performed, they charge for that particular service. They bill the health insurance company pays its portion. You might pay a deductible or a co-payment, but the provider gets paid for whatever they do. That system depends on the number of procedures that are carried out. It also is really an incentive for providers to do more, because the more they do, the more they get paid. It creates an uncertain financial climate for the providers because, like I said, it depends on how many services they provide in a time period as to how much revenue they receive. It also depends wildly on what services are performed, whether they're expensive, what you might call rare procedures that are quite expensive, or whether they're a routine healthcare checkup that is a lot less expensive. So now in the South, there's more capitation than there is up north. Up north, there's more fee-for-service, and down south, there's more capitation. So capitation is when the the health insurance company and the healthcare provider come to an agreement that the provider will receive a set amount per month per person that's assigned to that provider. So if a doctor has 2,000 people that are assigned to him as him or she being the primary care provider, that doctor would receive every month 2,000 times whatever that negotiated rate that they negotiated with the health insurance provider or health insurance company. So capitation does two things. One, it gives the provider a guaranteed revenue stream. And two, it shifts some of the risk in terms of what procedures are needed. It shifts it from the health insurance company to the provider. So the provider agrees to this payment rate based on an average set of services that might be expected to be received or be performed in a time period, a month usually. And then the provider accepts the risk that maybe in one particular month, they do a lot more of the more expensive procedures and less of the less expensive procedures, which means they've essentially lost in that respect. But then there's other months where they might not see anybody and they just rake in the cash without really doing much of anything, which isn't true. They don't do much of anything. But I mean, they will have less expensive procedures, more of the routine, office visits for a cold or a flu type where they look at you and they say, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. So that's the idea between risk transfer, and it's been transferred to the provider, and they're willing to take that risk because when they do, they attempt to manage the health care that's provided. So they don't have an incentive. If you come in with a sore knee, for example, in a fee-for-service world, they might have an incentive to say, well, let's get you an MRI, let's take some x-rays, maybe I need to do exploratory surgery to see what's inside that knee. And they get paid for all those things on a fee-for-service basis. On a capitated basis, they're more likely to say, well, let's give you some ibuprofen, maybe send you to a physical therapist for a couple of sessions, see how the knee responds, and we'll hold off on doing that exploratory surgery. So that is the idea behind capitation and fee-for-service. We are, like I said, looking at the regions. We'll be providing scenarios in a couple of weeks. When is the board meeting? Is it 2 weeks?
Yes.
Okay. So in 2 weeks at the November board meeting, we will be providing some scenarios on new regions to the board for their consideration. We'll listen to their feedback and we'll go back and in December come back with a final recommendation as to what the region should be, and then wait to see if the board likes our recommendation. So that's my quick presentation on health regions. I'm sure there are no questions, but if there are, I will attempt to answer them.
Any questions for Gary in the room? I know this is quite a bit different from a lot of the topics that we typically discuss here in the SEAC meeting, but we thought this was really important to bring to everybody's attention. The idea of health regions if you work for an agency that contracts with CalPERS for your health benefits, and you live, throughout different portions of the state, you may be looking at the cost of some of those premiums every year, and you might notice the huge disparity or a seemingly growing disparity between the cost of some of those plans down in Southern California versus the cost in Northern California. So, of course, CalPERS is committed not just to transparency, but also in trying to, we have the goal in mind, especially with our health benefits, to do the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. And that's certainly one of the guiding principles that's going to help guide the decision making and the information going forward to the board in the week after next. So if you haven't had a chance to tune into those board meetings, you can certainly stream in just by visiting our website. And we'll be discussing that in the Pension and Health Benefits Committee, which is scheduled for Wednesday, the 14th. So thank you very much, Gary.
Wednesday.
Yes, it'll be Wednesday, the 14th. And that's because the Veterans Day holiday is going to be on Monday, the 12th. So everything is kind of shifted for board meetings. If you're used to attending those in person or streaming those via the web, it's going to be kind of shifted one day later in the week to account for the Veterans Day holiday on Monday, the 12th. All right. Thank you very much, Gary. All right, so the last item on the agenda is a panel discussion with some of our experts. So this is our time for Q&A. If you've been jotting down questions throughout this morning, anything that's recently come into your head that you'd like to ask any of our experts, we've got the usual suspects of our subject matter experts here, and as questions come forward, we'll have those folks come up to the front of the room so you can hear those from them. That way you don't have to crane your neck and look behind you. And let's go. Any questions? Don't be shy. Raise your hand. Vina, come on. I know you got something. Okay. All right. Let's get Vina a microphone. What's that? Oh. All right. Shauna's getting you a microphone here. And also those folks joining us via the webcast, feel free to email any questions during this time. We'll try to work those in. And if we can't work those in, as always, we'll make sure we get those to the subject matter experts to get you those answers. All right, go ahead, Vina. Thanks.
I just want to know if there is any possibility of providing any assistance from PERS. PERS and STRS, they have so many changes in laws, interpretations, procedures, policies. It becomes overwhelming for the district staff to
try working here.
In this container, hold it in this container, because retirement, even though it's very, very important piece, but they have multiple things in their plate: Social Security, ACA, and benefits and all that. I don't know if there is any way you can provide us simple edits that are built in PERS system that we can easily provide what compliance and audits they use, so we can build our system to check similar type of items.
Okay, so let me make sure I'm on the same page here with you, Vina. Everything's changing all the time. Everything's, for lack of a better term, wicked complicated, right?
Yes.
So the question is, can we provide some kind of simple, more succinct language to give
some kind of edits, for example, that comp review looks for, or what kind of, for example, pay rate over this amount, instead of going through pages and pages of help guide. If there is a summarized, let's say 20 items, that will help them memorize.
Kind of something like a frequently asked questions, but more like frequent scenarios or guidelines.
Guidelines, so they can build in their system how PERS looks at
Sure.
these things.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And Renee's got the microphone. Go ahead, Renee. Thank you. Oh, gotta turn it on.
Does that mean I don't have to answer?
No, we got more mics. You're not off the hook, Renee. Oh. Okay. We'll try the other handheld mic.
All right, so I know there is a lot that goes on at CalPERS, and to try and condense it into one place, I'm not even sure that anybody would even want to take that on to look at it, let alone put it together. But what I'll try to do, I'll try to give you a little download here of like tips of like things to always keep an eye on. So the first thing I'm going to point to is circular letters. So, you were having some questions about what are the things that we look at? What are the things that we always find wrong? What are the things that audits, wants to look at? Well, in our new process that was developed a few years ago, we went, I think all of you are aware, we went from a process that was a comprehensive review by our Office of Audit Services to one that was a focused review. Are you guys, does this like ring a bell at all with anybody? Okay, good. All right. So, and what happened in going to that focused review, it was all about looking at high risk areas, because your high risk areas are the areas where you're going to have the likelihood of the lowest amount of compliance. And so, and those high risk areas, we have identified them a couple of years ago in some circular letters, and we did it for both compensation and for membership. So there are a couple of them out there. I want to say it's 20, does anybody remember when those came out? 2015? It came out right about the time, October. I know it was in October because it came out right in sync with the Ed Forum. They actually released them our first day of the Ed Forum at Riverside. So whenever we went to Riverside, that was the year. So, I even remember that. But those really identified those high risk areas for employer reporting. So that's one. What we've also tried to do to help educate is in My CalPERS, when you sign on, there's an area where we have different notes and things. So different unique things that might be happening with the system because we did a system change. You're going to find notes in there that are going to give you some feedback about different items. Sometimes things happen that we don't realize it happened, and that's why you call 888-CalPERS and you let us know. And so we'll check into it, and then hopefully we'll get something back out there to let others know if they experience it. The other thing I would recommend is if you have, I know school districts tend to go through turnover. And so the people that you need to work with, if you're at the County Office of Ed and you're needing to work with school district individuals that turn over in the fall, we do offer special presentations upon request. We love to do it to a group of employers in an area. So for example, if you're the County Office of Ed and you have a group of people in your area from your different districts that you want to train on certain topics, even if they're not in the system doing things because you as the County Office of Ed do that, but you want them to understand the rules, the business rules behind something so they understand what that reporting is. You can work with us. You can call our 888-CalPERS line, and we will actually work with you to set up a presentation to go through those types of specifics with you. Gwen over here has put together a couple of presentations on this that she does on a, I wouldn't say, often, but on a regular, ongoing basis to special school groups and things like that. So to help with that education, keeping it fresh, taking care of that turnover issue. You had asked about specifics, and not generally, but we don't give out specifics of when do we review this or when do we review that. For proprietary reasons, because we're not going to give out information and then have you make sure that you set thresholds right below that to try and slide things under. So we're not going to give those away. And those tend to change. So I'd give them to you, and within the next year they might change. So that wouldn't do you much good anyway. But we are willing to have conversations. We're willing to have, I know at our Ed Forum, we had several consultations with different employers just to talk about different topics. For example, our district is really struggling, or our county office of ed is really struggling with how to implement this piece. It just is not making sense. We will actually sit down, we'll have a conversation, we'll walk through that. There was one other piece that was tied to education. I don't want to take up the whole time talking about this, but there was one other piece. If it comes in my mind, I'll slide it in later on. But
you got another question, Vita? We've got a microphone for you now.
I just want to check on this one while you were mentioning all this list. Sometimes it's very hard for our IT to program things. So I wanted to know, everyone in the room, for example, if someone, you know how we have to separate the base pay from the special comp, and sometimes increase is given on base pay but not special comp, sometimes part of the special comps, not all. Whenever districts, they do retro or dockages, it's very time consuming and hard for our districts to sometimes post 20 lines, 30 lines to make an adjustment. And sometimes they have over 1,000 of employees at district. I just don't know how many of people in this room, they always take dockages into consideration when they have special comp. Like always make sure if the base pay one day is minused out, then longevity is minused out, or professional growth is. Does everybody take that into consideration? Or they just do base and that forget about the rest? I'm just kidding. Because it can mess up the service if we don't take all the factors into consideration. So I wanted to know, how do you program it? All your district do that?
And just to clarify, special comp changes will not affect your service credit.
No,
everybody knew that, right?
Yeah.
It's just your base pay.
I mean, it doesn't. It's true, but if it
can affect your final compensation. It does not affect your service credit.
I understand that piece, but if
I want to make sure they understood, though.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is, I want to explain that piece is that, let's say somebody who makes $10 an hour, $8 is base pay, $1 is longevity, $1 is bilingual. If they are minusing $10 out, because that's what they need to minus it out, 1 hour, but they don't break it down from each bucket, and they minus out $10 from the regular bucket, then we are minusing more service than 1 hour, because we didn't allocate all items from the proper bucket. So that's what I'm trying to understand. How do they do that?
Ours are key multiple lines.
Yours come multiple lines. And you take it out from each bucket properly. And your districts are okay too.
Oh, no, they're not okay with a lot of things. But
No, I mean, do they do that? Yes. Okay, that's what I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Vina, and thank you, Renee, as well. Any other questions here in the room? Okay, well, while you guys are thinking of some questions, I have one here let me scroll down and see if it's from here, from San Diego Unified School District. And their question, this was sent to us actually right after our educational forum last week. And it says, in a previous employer advisory committee meeting, it was commented that retired annuitants shouldn't work overtime hours or receive overtime or premium pay. However, during this week's CalPERS Educational Forum session, taking the complexity out of working after retirement, a scenario presented of a retired substitute bus driver indicated the retiree should receive overtime/premium pay as worked due to Fair Labor Standards Act rules. Would it be possible to get clarification as to whether there are restrictions for retired annuitants working overtime and receiving premium pay accordingly?
All right. So, hi everyone. I'm back. Is this on? Oh, it is on. Okay. I'm not talking loud enough. So regarding overtime for retired annuitants, retirees should not be working overtime. However, if they do, you are required to pay them under the law. So if you do, those hours need to still be accounted for when you're tracking for their 960, but we've encouraged employers that your retiree or annuitant should not be working overtime. But if they do, we understand you have to pay them. So that wouldn't be a situation where we would reinstate them for receiving that overtime pay, but we would expect it to be a one-time thing that doesn't occur for, multiple pay periods. Are we all sharing a mic?
We'll get some mics going around here in the room.
Follow up to your explanation on the bus driver overtime piece. Would it be fair to assume that if you saw multiple violations of this going on, that would raise a red flag to your organization?
So it would. We would hope not to see that. We would hope to be able to catch it at the beginning. But yes, it would be something that we would look at and we would review.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And for the next question, we've got a microphone coming your direction. Okay, in the back of the room. Yes.
Debbie from Fresno County office. A while back, Brad, this is probably going to go to you. Sorry, you thought you were going to get away. You had reiterated about coaching stipends, and you had sent a follow-up email out after it stating that stipends, unless the position was on your publicly available salary schedule with steps and columns and job description, was not reportable to CalPERS. Is that still so?
I think Brad should come up here and sit with me at the front.
Yes, that's
Then
still
he's not
so.
going
For
to.
coaching stipends, if you don't have that position on your pay schedule with a consistent pay rate, it's not reportable. If you're just reporting it as like a lump sum because they were a coach for 3 months and they got $500, it's not a special comp, it's not a pay rate, it's a stipend, not reportable.
Okay, now part two of that question. I have a person who is adamant about service prior to membership, and they were just a wrestling coach and they got a stipend going back years. So I reported it on my service prior to membership form that it was just a lump sum stipend. There were no hours attached to it. He could have worked 2 hours in it. He could have worked 100 hours. I don't know. I got a letter back stating that it was incomplete. So now I have a guy, the wrestling coach, who is very angry because he's saying I didn't do my job, but I don't know how to convert a lump sum coaching stipend into hours. So I need help.
So it's a position on the pay schedule, and
No, it's on their stipend schedule with all their
but you need to
coaches.
report the hours for.
They want hours for the dollar amount, but I can't give hours because it's a wrestling coach.
The first step is you have to define what their pay rate is.
There's no pay rate. It's just lump sum. So whether I don't know if he did 100 hours or if he was like, hey, yeah, I'm the wrestling coach, go wrestle, and got paid for it.
I don't know if they're allowed to buy that on service prior to membership.
And see, I didn't think so either, and that's why I specifically put that on there, but a determination letter was given, and the employee is calling me irate saying that I did it incomplete. So I just wanted some guidance on that, and I don't know if anybody else in the room has coaching stipend questions or any stipend, so I thought I'd bring it up.
Right. I mean, you have to have a pay rate, obviously, to be able to calc out the service credit on SPM. But I would say that it's the same rules for compensation, right? So if you reported a coaching stipend, let's say you even did it as a pay rate and you shouldn't have because there's no pay schedule, we would deny that every time. So if you reported it as a pay rate and we saw no position on the publicly available pay schedule, was excessive pay, we're going to deny. Or if it was a lump sum, we would definitely deny it.
Yeah, they were all paid in lump sums.
So the same rule would apply to an SPM. Service prior to membership, they're not going to allow you to buy service credit for a position that wasn't eligible for CalPERS anyways. I'm assuming, and we probably should ask the SCP area if this is the case, because the pay rate wasn't provided or the other details we would normally need for payroll, that's probably why they said it was incomplete. But at the end of the day, I believe that it wouldn't be eligible to be purchased anyhow, because it'd be the same thing under a comp review as a stipend or even as a pay rate. If it's not a true position on there, we would deny it, and we wouldn't allow that for service credit purchase either.
Right, and it doesn't sound like they've made a determination yet in this case. They're just looking for additional information in order to do that. So if you can give me the person's information, I'd be happy to work with the service credit team to take another look at it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I would say no, you don't need to track those for hours because it's not an eligible CalPERS position. We're only looking for you to track hours for positions that people could potentially become qualified for membership. So, like if you're a part-time person and you were never a member before and you're not in membership yet, yes, you track those hours because once they hit 1,000 hours, they're going to be put into this valid position that's on a pay schedule with the pay rate. But you don't track hours for non-PERSable positions. So, like these coaches, they are not allowed into PERS at all, so you wouldn't track those hours. Even if they were a coach for 1,000 hours, they wouldn't become a member because it's not a valid position with CalPERS.
Can we get that in writing?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Oh.
And just to clarify, because the question was asked outside of a microphone, the question was, can we get that in writing? And the answer is yes. We'll
work to provide something.
Yeah.
And it looks like we've got a question over near Josh.
Can we get an update on the audit reviews? What are there any going on right now? There used to be a period of time where a lot of them were going on and it kind of like slowed down, or I don't know if we're not being informed as a county office, or just they're not happening right now.
No,
Chris is back there.
Like Renee was talking about earlier, we kind of don't tip our hat on what we're auditing, but yes, there are definitely audits going on. Every quarter they're doing a new focus review. I know we're about to get the final on the pension spiking one.
Chris to chime in.
That should be coming out in December, but the rest of them, I definitely know we're out in the field auditing. Did you have anything to add, Chris, or?
Yeah, we don't really say who's going to be audited in each cycle. Schools are always on our risk assessment, so there's the potential that they could be audited at any time. But as of right now, the only ones I know that where there is schools is the last audit we did with pay rate increases, and that one should be coming final in December.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. We've got time for maybe one more question or so. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, I'd like to segue into kind of some closing statements here before we break for lunch. And, for the last several years, the Office of Stakeholder Relations, where, of course, myself and my team reside, have been facilitating these meetings. And we want to let you know that we're going to be transitioning the facilitation role of these SEAC meetings going forward for 2019 to a group that kind of lies within Renee's division, within the Employer Account Management division. And they are a group of lovely folks. You may be familiar with them already, but I'd like to just introduce them to you. And I can't see around the room well enough to know if everyone's here. Oh, great. Fantastic. So if they can just stand up so we can kind of put some names to the faces. We have Stephanie Duncan from the Employer Response Team. Also from the Employer Response Team, Susan Forer. And is Bill Greenall here? He's upstairs. Oh, he's on the phone. All right. Well, these folks, like I mentioned, they're from the Employer Response Team. If you're not familiar with the Employer Response Team, they operate somewhat as a kind of a task force or a strike team, whatever you may want to call it. They are the specially trained professionals that are able to assist employers with some of the more complex inquiries or issues that they may have. And so not only do they have an incredible wealth of knowledge when it comes to the CalPERS business process and operations, but they are an absolutely wonderful, nice group of folks to work with. And so I think as we transition into 2019, you guys will be served incredibly well. So I'd like to welcome them to the kind of the SEAC family. And as we go forward into next year, you'll be seeing a lot more of them. So thank you very much, guys. All right. So like I mentioned, next year we're going to be back across the river at CalSTRS. Those meetings are going to be Wednesday, February 6th, Wednesday, May 1st, Wednesday, August 7th, and Wednesday, November 6th. You don't need to commit all those dates to memory by now. Of course, we'll be in touch. The format of those meetings will be exactly as it was today, with CalPERS in the morning and then CalSTRS in the afternoon, just following lunch. Lastly, you heard me mention it a little bit earlier. Our next board meeting is going to be held on Tuesday, November 13th through Thursday, November 15th, right here at CalPERS headquarters, just down the hall a little bit in the CalPERS auditorium. And they're going to be discussing items such as the health regions presentation that Gary provided with us today. Thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend today's meeting. Lunch is served. Lunch is going to be served just around the corner in room LPN 1170, 1180. Feel free to take your lunch outside. As far as I know, it's a pretty nice day out there, so feel free to take advantage of the sunshine during your break. All right. That concludes the CalPERS portion of the SEAC meeting for today. Thank you, everybody.